Last of Us 2 is a game that freezes your blood, then tries to inject a heavy dose of cocaine through your bloodstream in an effort to make up for the narrative dissonance and contradictory emotions, in an attempt to cultivate empathy from something that almost everyone loathes, and then over-exaggerates everything to a nauseating level to grab every trick out of the empathy playbook to get the player to empathize with a character that saves a zebra, finds her dead father, goes on a revenge quest, completes that revenge quest, just to have the same character journey said character had that she viciously murdered in cold blood because of course she does. Joel as a character had everything to lose, with the only thing he truly had being Ellie, and they, the Fireflies, wanted to take that from him. Thus he saves her to soothe his own broken heart from the devastating loss of his own newly adopted daughter. He didn't do what he did on some romantic whim, he did it because he was selfish. He intentionally destroyed the idea of a better world and all the quixotic idealism of what the Fireflies were about, and therein lies the fundamental flaw with the narrative of The Last of Us Part 2. It rejects the idea of possibilities, and its narrative is the equivalency of a homework assignment we all had to do in high school, and we don't really feel like writing it, but we'd all get a bad grade if we don't do it, so we push ourselves to write it despite the fact that we don't want to, and then lethargically drag ourselves to do it, and 7 years later, when you think it's done, and you think it's good enough, in reality it's not. It's a mediocre game, and that's this game. But there's still a way it can look really, really cool.
You have no idea what you're walking into.
What are you doing?
You don't know how large that group is, how armed.
I don't care. You can't stop this.
Consider this clip from Mission Impossible Fallout.
I think there's something you need to know. I'm gonna stop you right there. You had a terrible choice to make in Berlin. Recover the plutonium or save your team. You chose your team and now the world is at risk. Some flaw deep in your core being simply won't allow you to choose between one life and millions. And you see that as a sign of weakness. To me, that's your greatest strength.
It doesn't take mental gymnastics to understand this. There is no wrong in love because love is powerless, and with what these characters endure, these characters are so afraid of losing the things they love that they hold on to them too tightly, being unable to fix the things they've been wrong about. From Abby's revenge on Joel to Ellie's revenge on Abby and friends as retribution for Joel's death. The trauma's there as it's displayed in Abby becoming a Black Ops guerrilla so she can protect the people that she loves, and Ellie's withering and decaying body as her own quest debilitates her and horrifically mutilates her physically to avenge the person that she loved. The underlying problem is that this game isn't about love. Well, it is, but the word love is never used once by any of the characters despite the core theme of the game being hate, and how the world is faulty and everything is sword and shit within the world. Showcasing there's no beauty in it whatsoever, revealing that every character is an immoral monster and able to recognize when they became this thing trapped in the belly of a horrible machine that's bleeding to death. That there's no humanity in humanity, and what most of this game wants to get across works against itself, which is love and not hate. I don't disagree with what Abby wants, though I don't fucking like her. I don't disagree with what Ellie wants. I do like her, but I don't like her in this game. I disagree with how all this is written, and how Neil Druckmann and Haley Gross puked all over their ideas and themes and characters with this drunken narrative structure that requires mental gymnastics to understand, because there's 4 different timelines that are told in non-linear fashion. But by process of elimination, the simplest answer is the correct one, and the correct answer is The Last of Us Part 2's story doesn't exist because it never did, and this game is a horrible mistake. To quote Graham Poobah Alan Moore, it's not the job of the artist to give the audience what the audience wants. If the audience knew what they needed, then they wouldn't be the audience, they would be the artist. It's the job of the artist to give the audience what they need. However, as an audience member, I do not empathize with my enemy, nor do I accept her identity or support the supporting characters. I don't empathize with how 2 writers decide to fuck with the player base place and put everything in vain and couldn't do better than this. A game that puts the player at long odds with the story's characters and removes all its agency that can't fall through on its ideas and only disappoints. Whereas the original game dealt in uncertainty and justified Joel's final actions by constantly enhancing their relationship throughout their journey, this game attempts to deal in absolutes, but the problem is, nothing is absolute. Everything changes, everything moves, everything revolves, everything flies and goes away. This soap opera would have the player believe that every death and muddled conflict that has occurred since the first game is Joel's fault because Ellie didn't die, and have her brain carved out to make a cure. However, the game nor its characters ever consider, what if they were wrong? If I were the writer of The Last of Us Part 2, the game would have explored the origins of the virus, instead of focusing on a stupid revenge fantasy. Wait a minute. Revenge fantasy? Let that sink in. What if these characters were wrong, and in their desperation to be right, they couldn't view nor comprehend how wrong they were? There is no cure. In The Walking Dead, the characters wanted to believe there was a cure, and when they found out there wasn't at the CDC, they drove some characters to suicide. In Z Nation, there is a cure to the zombie infection, but that doesn't change the outlook of how humanity is viewed, and remains a wacky adventure in a post-apocalypse because society has been completely uprooted, and nothing could ever be the same again. Most of the characters accepting and creating their own little communities where some are more disturbing than wholesome and somber. The caliber of writing displayed in The Last of Us 2 doesn't ask these questions. Ellie is mad at Joel because she couldn't die and save the world, but doesn't consider what would happen if she died and nothing happened. The writers make it sound like it was an absolute certainty. Ellie would have went onto that table, they would have carved out their brain, bada bing bada boom, there would have been a cure and the world would have been saved. Not a shred of doubt. When Ellie and Abby are fighting in the movie theater, Ellie never screams at Abby and tells her, "You killed my father." The one thing both of these characters have in common with one another is left unsaid between these characters. Does that sound right? It doesn't sound right to me. It can be said in John Wick.
And your son took that from me. Stole that from me. Killed that from me!
But what does The Last of Us 2 do to subvert expectations?
Joel Miller.
Who are you?
Guess.
However, the writers feel like they need to vomit out 30 hours of revenge is wrong and violence is bad exposition presented as gameplay, showcasing the benefits of connecting with others, but when the two focal characters begin to throw hands at one another, they don't know a thing about one another besides they murdered each other's friends and families. But don't explore why with one another? There's plenty of ways these characters can communicate without seeing one another. They could have talked via radio, through notes, or through characters learning about other characters through other characters and characters talking to other characters about said characters. But the writers are so wrapped up in their clammy egos, they write minuscule details about everything else besides whatever doesn't push their narrative to its end, which amounts to nothing. After all the people you've butchered in this game to kill one person, you can't pull the trigger on Abby's character because, the writers say you can't because they said so. They don't even give the player the agency to choose, and it's all poorly written. If the writers actually believed in their writing abilities, they would have gave the player the agency to choose to allow Abby to live or die. And at no point during the confrontation between Abby and Ellie at the end of the game does she ever say again to reiterate this, "Joel was like my father and I loved him and you took that from me." Nor does Abby say, "I'm sorry." All the character Ellie ultimately kills in retribution for Joel are trash bags, reaffirming the idea that everything is awful and humanity sucks. Not one of these people attempts to explain Abby's point of view to Ellie. It's LOL, it's cutie pie dialogue, witty remarks and snarks followed by, "Look how evil I am." Jordan is a trash character, and he's also kinda rapey. I kinda get that feeling from his character. Nora was actually onto something with this.
Where's Abby?
You still hear his screams?
What?
But then she had to open up her whore mouth and be a bitch and tell Ellie how evil and callous she was and said this.
I hear them every night. Yeah. Yeah, that little bitch got what he deserved.
You fucking cut.
This was a moment where everything could have changed, but the writers deliberately wrote that because of course they did, then continue to. Remember when Owen, a character that advocates that Ellie should live and doesn't explain why Joel had to die when there's a gun pointing at him? Under normal circumstances or in real life, when someone has a knife or a gun to your face, you typically try to humanize yourself so you wouldn't die. But these characters deliberately make scumbag moves because the writers say they do. Mel doesn't scream, "Please don't shoot me, I'm pregnant with a baby," which a rational woman would have done. But Actor Owen makes a galaxy brain move to jump at Ellie while she has a loaded gun when she deliberately needs them alive to answer her questions. Meaning, Ellie isn't going to be killing Mel or Owen anytime soon until she gets her answers. Ellie shoots Owen in self-defense, and Mel lunges at Ellie with a knife when she's pregnant and doesn't scream, "I'm pregnant, please don't fucking shoot me!" She gets killed like a dumbass. Ultimately, what I'm saying here is that every reaction and action taken by every supporting character in this game deliberately results in a violent reaction by them causing the primary character you're playing as to react with violence in kind. This is the major flaw of this game. It deals in absolutes and reinforces the volatile sides of characters that should otherwise be compassionate and understanding to a certain capacity. All these characters can live together, but the writers don't want them to because of course they don't. They need conflict for the plot. Whereas television shows like The 100 and The Walking Dead can understand this.
Everyone who's alive right now. Everyone who's made it this far. We've all done the worst kinds of things just to stay alive. But we can still come back. We're not too far gone. We get to come back. I know. We all can change.
But because of the governor's bloated ego and because he was jealous that Rick was a better leader than him, he started a war because of his small penis. Whereas like Rito of a Healer, aka Revenge Porn the Anime, The Last of Us Part 2 doesn't want to be better because it doesn't fit the writer's narrative agenda. It wants to haplessly bend his characters over a tree stump with their pants down and ready to get fisted. And the reason why this game is executed so drabbily is like I said priorly, the story doesn't exist. When they initially made this game, press release after press release, the player base were informed the game was about Ellie, until it leaked that it wasn't true. Killing Joel isn't a problem, but irreparably killing Joel in the prologue of the game to later play through 15 hours of flashbacks regarding why this was justified isn't. But because this game was to be about everyone and everything but its prior characters, it has to shoehorn all this extra fluffer in because if it isn't, the story wouldn't make sense. Thus the mental gymnastics required to understand the story and its dumb timelines. I mean, the writers had to know they messed up when they were writing about flashbacks within flashbacks. If the game started immediately following the aftermath of Joel killing the Fireflies to save Ellie, it would have been fine, but because it'd be false advertisement to do so, the creators of this game did whatever they did to this game. If this game marketed itself with Abby being the new protagonist and her giving up her revenge quest on Joel at the start of the game, just to randomly stumble upon Joel and Ellie later, where she has to make the choice of killing Joel who she's become friendly with and risk losing her new connections and friendships for the sake of revenge, that would have been a more interesting story. The player could have had the agency to kill Joel as Abby, kickstarting Ellie's campaign where you'd get revenge, where if you don't, Abby, Ellie, Levi, and the gang all become friends and live in Jackson happily ever after or something stupid like that. But no! The writers have to subvert expectations and be different. They have to make a prologue where the main character you're playing as, which is Ellie, begins a revenge quest after Joel's death to hunt Abby and her buds down to a movie theater, just to play through hours of flashbacks within flashbacks just to go back to the theater and have nothing happen. Just to play more flashbacks, they eventually jump into the main story where when you finally meet Abby again, you don't even kill her because the story doesn't want to explain why. You've killed hundreds of people to get to this point in the story and move mountains, and the game doesn't incentivize stealth to keep a minimal body count. Thus, when you finally get to Abby, adding one more body isn't going to divert your ticket to hell, so why not? At this point in the game, you've literally killed too many people to get to this point to not pull the trigger. But because the story said it's enough, the writers said that's enough, a choice the player should have some agency in doesn't matter because the writers know if the players has the option to kill the bitch, everyone's going to be smashing that square button just for the hell love it. But to understand more what I'm saying, under no means is The Last of Us Part 2 necessarily a bad game. It's just a game that's stupidly executed. Now, maybe it could be that I'm drunk. Maybe if the game was spliced together and edited in the correct way without the jumbled up timeline and the player had the agency to choose if Abby lived or died, I'd be a little bit more tolerable and accepting of what Naughty Dog has created. But that's not the case, because two writers decided not to have anyone edit their story in a total of 7 years, getting enough feedback to understand that this is not a good story, making The Last of Us Part 2 a stereotypical revenge story that could have happened to anyone in this world. What made the first game special is that the story couldn't happen to anyone but those characters. You're a dude transporting humanity's messiah to a doctor that's going to pickle away her brain cells into a cure. Where in this game, I wouldn't have been surprised at the end of the game if another kid had jumped out of the bushes and blasted Ellie away with a shotgun for revenge for some random kid's death that you murdered throughout the game. What makes games like Spec Ops: The Line special is that the debilitating mental stability that slowly begins to deteriorate the main character under the psychological strain he was in caused by the atrocities he committed could have only happened to him. While most players are oblivious to the psychological damage of what has happened to him until the final act of the game, when it's revealed everything wasn't sunsets and horseback rides like your typical Call of Duty shooter. The Last of Us Part 2 is not a good game. It's not a game that speaks or connects to everyone. It's a celebration of humanity in a sordid and depressing time. It's not a redemptive story. It's about human suffering and hate for the sake of it. I didn't enjoy playing this game either. Whereas in games like Dishonored, featuring an extensive variety of weapons at your disposal as well as supernatural abilities that are enhanced by each of the game world's environments, focusing on verticality, enabling the player to experience the entirety of a level from sewer system to waterways to rooftops, The Last of Us doesn't even reach Hitman's level of enjoyment. At least in Hitman and the sequel reboot, because of the sandbox nature of the game's design, allowing the player to take advantage in their efforts to achieve their goals, which is to definitely assassinate their target, there's a myriad and an assortment of weapons, environmental hazards, distractions, and tactics that can be creatively used to the player's advantage to dispose your enemies. The Last of Us Part 2 has the right way to play and the wrong way to play, and as much as I love stealth, I'm not a big fan of running and hiding, then lining up the correct opportunity for the perfect gameplay performance to perform this one specific takedown task, which is the majority of gameplay this game features. It's boring, I don't like it, and Neil Druckmann was right. The Last of Us Part 2 isn't fun to play. 5 out of 10. The game features a pointless homicidal rampage, the character arcs are dookie, and it's all at the best of a death of another character that turned most of the main characters you were supposed to like into callous, uncharacteristic assholes, who do what they do because the writers said they do. Forgoing all of the prior character development because why not? Shrink a character and watch them become shallow, then watch them grow into a better person or a beautiful tree. I'm also kinda peeved off that the game allows me to butcher everyone else besides that one person that's responsible for this game existing. Abby gets everything, whereas Ellie gets a bottle of piss by the end of the game. There's this bias between who the two writers like, and it's stupidly obvious. Never mind, this game's a 4 out of 10. There's no real reason for this game to exist because it has nothing interesting to say. Even the revenge is pointless. Even a dog shit series like Redo of a Healer, the revenge means something, and there's an attempt at some sort of character retrospection. But when Joel dies, a focal character within this game, none of the characters have anything to say about it. Even Ellie, the character she's avenging, and the overall story is all over the place as well. Then I mentioned there's a pregnant lady on the battlefield, which is just as cringy as that story where Spider-Woman fought aliens while pregnant to give birth to that child in 2 pages to go back out there and fight some more. Then there's the plot convenience and the ex machinas that utterly annihilate your suspension of disbelief and the utter stupidity of most characters. This is just a twisted and manipulating game that's dotting, and it's like playing Russian roulette. The only way you could possibly enjoy this game's narratives is if you were drunk.
Wow.
Frank, what are you doing?